Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Ely with the University of Houston, the College of Pharmacy. I'm the Director of Pharmacy Admissions for the PharmD Professional Program. And today we have, I know that many of you that are joined today are in the process of writing all the components of your PharmCAS application. And today's session of Tell Your Story is going to be led by Mr. Jonathan Richards, who is from the University of Houston Writing Center. And so he has a lot of experience in helping students navigate through this process and share their story on paper, or I should say online. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan Richards, and he will take it from here. I will be here throughout the course of the session too. If there are questions or concerns, you can just drop them in the chat. And with that introduction, please, Mr. Richards, take it away.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody's had a good morning so far, and looking forward to a fun weekend, hopefully. I'll go ahead and introduce myself a little more formally. My name is Jonathan Richards. I'm the STEM program manager at the University of Houston Writing Center. I've been with the Writing Center since 2008, so roughly, what is that, 12 years? I'm not a mathematician, but I enjoyed a lot, and one of my favorite things to work on are personal essays, personal statements for graduate, professional, medical, pharmacy programs. Today, I'm going to be talking about some general tips, strategies, ideas, and so forth on how to improve, begin wherever you are in the process, how to work with your personal essay for pharmacy school. So the first thing, the very, very first thing to keep in mind when we're working with personal essays or statements is that they are all persuasive documents. Personal statements, personal essays are going to look different per what you're applying for. One for pharmacy school is going to look completely different for doing one for study abroad. And that's going to look different from, say, doing a Fulbright to medical school. They're all going to look just a little different. But the one thing they all have in common is they are all persuasive. You're trying to persuade the committee why you are the right candidate for the program you're applying for. And so that's the one thing that we really always need to be coming back to. Am I being persuasive enough in this document that I'm writing? All right. So what makes a personal essay successful? Well, first of all, it articulates in a clear, realistic, and focused manner your motivation for applying to pharmacy school. So this includes identifying your personal values and tying them to your personal traits by referencing defining experiences. Now, something I might say repeatedly throughout this presentation is making concrete connections, all right? So we want to make sure you are making concrete connections in your writing between what are your experiences, what are your goals, how are they connected? How have your previous and current experiences prepared you for what you're applying for? How is that going to prepare you for your future careers as pharmacists? These are things that you need to touch on and make real connections in the writing. And I know that when we write, we often think, well, so-and-so is just going to understand what I'm saying. They know what I mean by this. And the thing that I always tell students is to pretend that the reader is the laziest person that you know. And so you have to do all the work for the reader. If the reader has to read a sentence a few times or make assumptions, you're not doing your job as the writer for the personal essay. So it's very, very important that you be very direct, that you make the connections that are there, even if it seems obvious to you. It's important to do that because we don't want to leave the reader with questions or assumptions. We want to be able to have the agency over our own stories, right? Okay, it sets you apart from other applicants. Real quick, somebody can just turn off their mic and tell me, how many applicants do you think there are in each cycle?
Like 400.
300.
Yeah, around about a lot, right? And so when when the committees are reading your personal essays, it's very easy to remember which ones are good, which ones are bad, and it's very easy to forget everything else in between. So I've sat on a scholarship committee where we had to read personal statements, and we had to read about 700 at one time. Now I can tell you which ones were the really good ones. I remember which ones were the really bad ones. I do not remember about 90% of them, honestly. And so we want to make sure that you're remembered for the right reasons. Set yourself apart, you know. It demonstrates evidence of relevant experience and preparation. We want to see that you're prepared. We can look in the application about they've got a good GPA. They did shadowing experience. It's listed on their resume. They took all the good classes. It's on their transcript. So there's all these things we can see, but we need to see that you can articulate how those experiences, how those instances that you had have prepared you for studying to be a pharmacist. That demonstrates your fit and suitability for the program to which you're applying to. So this goes back kind of to what I was saying about being a persuasive document. You want to persuade the committee that this is the absolute perfect program for you, and that you are the perfect fit. You're like the last piece of the puzzle that we've been looking for that program. And you do that by making concrete connections. You do that by really fleshing out your experiences and how they're related to your goals of being a pharmacist, of studying in that program, and then eventually perhaps being a pharmacist. All of this is very, very important. So making those concrete connections to establish that your fit and your suitability for the program is spot on. And that's very, very important. And it complements your other admissions materials without repeating them. So I mentioned just now, we can see if you shadowed somebody, it's probably on your resume. We can see how well you did in your classes. Your GPA is going to be on your transcript. Your classes are going to be listed on your transcript. So there's really not a need to repeat any of that information or list the things that are already known in, say, a resume, a transcript, other application materials. Now, what you can do, for example, let's say we can see that you took organic chemistry, for example. We can see you did well in it. What we don't know about that is, did you struggle in it? How did you overcome those struggles? Those are things that you can address in the personal essay. And so be thinking about that, because you don't want to list things that we already can see in other areas. And one reason you don't want to do that is because you don't have a lot of space. You want to use the space in your personal essay to your advantage. There's only so much room on there. I have a phrase, I don't know if it quite makes sense, but you want to make sure you're getting all those chicken nuggets. You want to make sure that everything that's in there is a plus. There's no negative. And if there is a negative, you want to be able to turn it around until it's a positive. Show how you grew from that instance. Show how you became a stronger individual. Show how you learned from that experience so that you don't end up in that negative experience in the future. Everybody's essay is going to be different. There's no one right way to do personal essays. There are several wrong ways to do a personal essay, but there's not one right way. And the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to be giving you lots of tools. You decide which tools you want to use that's best for you. So we'll continue moving forward with tips for writing personal essays. Create a cohesive narrative with a clear thesis. So when we say a clear thesis, I'm not necessarily meaning that like at the end of the first paragraph, there has to be a strict thesis statement, like what we would know from, say, an English composition course. It's not necessarily what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is we need to have a kind of blueprint, a map system maybe, to know where we're going. So the reader needs to know, what are you going to talk about? How are you going to talk about it? What's the order you're going to talk about it in? So that's really what we mean by clear thesis to establish your narrative. It's kind of a guide. Aesthetically, if I'm the reader and I see like where we're going with this, what order are we going to talk about things in, it makes it easier for me, the reader. Now, is it more work for the writer? Yes, it is. But remember, we want to make sure that the reader, the committee who's reading these, has the easiest experience, that they understand it completely without having to reread anything. They shouldn't have to go back and reread sentences or go back to the first paragraph and say, wait a minute. Because if they're having to read about 400 of these, they probably don't have the time to do any of that. So stuff like this is also important to think about. They don't have time to reread or go back to this paragraph or make sure, well, did they talk about this already? Did they talk about this twice? They don't have time for that. So just be thinking about that, and laying it all out at the very beginning, how you're going to talk about things, makes it much easier for the reader, okay? And so here's an example. Experiences such as this have helped me understand that my interest in research only finds its fulfillment when patients are successfully treated. I want to become a doctor because my natural curiosity for laboratory research is combined with a successful ability to communicate to diverse audiences, a combination that is vital for effectively delivering positive healthcare outcomes to underserved populations. So we can see right there in that second sentence that they clearly defined why they want to be a doctor, what are the different aspects of why they want to be a doctor, and we can kind of see these are the areas that we're going to be talking about in more detail as we get through the paper. So write in your own voice. I say this all the time to students. We don't want to admit robots into programs. We want to admit humans. And we want you to be able to write in your authentic voice, but we also want you to be professional. So you shouldn't be using any colloquial terms. I wouldn't necessarily use as many, natural, casual speech, so to speak. But we don't want you also to be using all of these words that you're looking up in the thesaurus because you think that writing needs to be this heavy, heightened academia, flowery speech. We're not looking for that. I was working with a few personal essays, personal statements the past few months. And this was a problem I saw with a lot of students. They were using words like cornucopia. I don't use cornucopia when I'm speaking with anybody. So, it's something to think about. Do you use the words that you're using in professional settings? If you're writing words that you're not using in a professional setting on your own, then you may want to consider, am I sounding authentic? Am I sounding like I'm writing in my own voice? That's very important. And I want to tell you something. If we as the reader can tell that you're not being authentic, it's not as pleasurable as a reading experience for us. And we remember that. We remember that, ooh, this sounds really fake, for a lack of a better word, or crafted in a way that makes them seem not as authentic. And so we really want to see that. So this is an example that needs improvement. From all of these experiences, I came to a realization that being a pharmacist means being an imperative leader, an indispensable team player, and someone with refined dexterity skills. All of these are they sound really fancy, right? On the surface, they're gilded. They sound really fancy and pretty and like things you should put in this. But like indispensable team player, what does that even mean? Imperative leader. What is an imperative leader? So these are things that you really need to be watchful of because it's very easy to just slap on some fancy sounding taglines and say, well, I'm good. This sounds great. This sounds like what every other person in academia is writing. Let's move forward. Wrong-o, move back. We need to make this more sounding like you wrote it, like a human wrote it, not a robot, not a computer, not an AI system. So this is a better example. Leading a pharmacy practice requires coordination among many professionals, and my experience as president of UH Students for Change has demonstrated my success in working with a team of my peers. So do you see how there's this kind of concrete connection about an experience that this student has had wherein they were president of UH Students for Change, and they're making a connection about what they learned from that experience. In this case, their success in working with a team of their peers. So they've made this concrete connection, and that's very important. So we see that. Talk about your characteristics and qualifications by referencing specific examples. We saw a little bit of this in the last slide with the improved statement, but I want to go a little bit more into detail. Now, I've said concrete connections a few times here. And what I really mean, I want to go further into that. What I mean is if you had a shadowing experience, say with a pharmacist, we want to know, what did you learn from it? It's not just, well, I learned how to measure doses, or I learned the differences between this class of drug or this class of drug. That's not what we want to know. What skills, what tangible, transferable skills did you learn from this? Did you learn how to communicate with patients more so? Did you learn how to engage with a group of pharmacists or work well in a team? These are things that we want to learn about from those experiences, and making concrete connections and being very direct and obvious in your writing about those is going to create a much easier reading experience for the reader, and thus improve your chances perhaps of getting some sort of acceptance. Okay, needs improvement. To succeed academically, you must work hard, and I'm well qualified based on my work ethic. This is something I see all the time in student writing when we're talking about personal essays, personal statements. And the idea is that they're mentioning it, but they tell me, but they don't show me, is what I hear a lot. They tell me they're a hard worker without giving me any evidence. If you remember from maybe your English comp classes, whether that was in college or high school, people will say, well, if you're going to make a claim, you have to back it up with evidence. This is the same thing here. If you're going to claim you have good work ethic, the reader wants to know, show me, how do you have good work ethic? Where did you learn this good work ethic come? Give me an example. And so a much better version of that is going to be working as a math tutor while simultaneously taking 18 hours and receiving a 3.5 GPA last semester was a challenge, but my planning and time management skills assured my success. In addition to using the work as a way to earn money, I could also brush up on my skills for my classes. And I knew that I would also have time to study when I wasn't working with students. So you see what's been done here to kind of draw it out and really show the reader that they have a good work ethic. Reach for those experiences and see, how can I connect? That's what I mean by concrete connections. And being that direct in your writing is going to be very, very useful to you all. So, like I said before, not every personal statement, personal essay is going to be the same. Everybody says that you have to have some kind of hook or like plug or draw in. And I've seen them done very well, but I've also seen them done really, really poorly. So take, for example, a lot of people like to include personal anecdotes. What I say is, if you're going to use a personal anecdote, make sure that it is related to what you're actually writing about. I was reading a personal statement and helping a student for medical school, and they started with a personal anecdote to try to establish a hook. But the personal anecdote they used was about how they walked on the seashore with their grandfather looking for seashells. But then they went right into being, oh, I want to be a cardiologist. Well, there's no relation between the story and them wanting to be a cardiologist. Do you know what I mean? So their intention to put a hook in there using a personal anecdote really didn't work. So you can use a hook. It's not a horrible idea, but I caution students with it because the obsession is then, oh, I have to have a hook. Oh, it has to be good. Oh, it needs to be the best personal anecdote. No, if you don't have a hook that you think will work best for you, then maybe it is better to just kind of jump right into it and go right for the meat and potatoes, so to speak. Does that make sense? Moving forward to the next slide. Be specific. This is going to be a big one. I've talked about concrete connections and being very direct in your writing. This goes into that, being very specific. So needs improvement. My internship helped me understand the power of serving others. What does this sentence say? Not much. But this one, through working directly with wonderful researchers in the dynamic field of biotechnology, I see now that this field has the wonderful potential not only to be on the cutting edge of technological innovation, but also to aid many patients who previously would not have had access to such resources. So we get a little bit of the why, a little bit of the how, we get some more information from this. It's not just making a claim without backing it up. You have to be specific. You have to make concrete connections. You have to be direct. And you can't leave any assumptions in the air. You can't say, the reader just is going to know what I'm saying. No, don't do that. Don't even try it. Be specific. And at the same time, we want to be concise. No one said personal essays were easy. Being concise, but being specific. Remember, you only have so much space to write these. And that space is, as I said earlier, prime real estate. You want to make sure, what am I talking about? Is it going to be in my best interest to talk about this versus this? Is it going to be in my best interest space-wise for me to spend more time on this rather than this? So just something to think about while you're working through. So this is a really good example. Through working directly with researchers in biotechnology, I now understand the field's potential not only to be on the cutting edge of technological innovation, but also to aid in many patients in need. So what we're seeing here is pretty much everything that we saw from the better section, but it's been condensed. It's been made more concise, right? When sentences are really long, when we start to go on and on and on, for the reader, it can get a little tiring. And remember, they're going to be reading about 400 of these. So if everybody is writing this way for the second example, where it's a little bit more on the long-winded side, they tend to go on and maybe ramble, it's not going to be enjoyable for the reader. And if you want to get in the program, you want to make sure that your personal statement, your personal essay is enjoyable to read. And so by making it concise, it makes it easier to understand, easier to read, and more enjoyable to read. So something to think about. Okay, so I want to go ahead and show you guys an example. I'm going to go ahead and let's see.
I can see it on your screen. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I know I said 12:37. Since we had a little difficulty, we'll make it 12:38. If you're not able to have it open via PDF from the chat, I'll go ahead and scroll down here in a minute so you can see the last few lines of the personal statement below on the second page. So just a few more seconds and I'll be moving it down to the last few lines. Okay, so can anyone tell me what's been done well about this personal statement? Pretty good job at making those concrete connections we've been talking about, right? So what else is done very well? Yeah, there is a hook here using a personal anecdote. If I was working with this student, I would want to know exactly why they're using this specific personal anecdote as a hook. Perhaps there's one that would be better suited for the overall paper, but I think that it's a very good attempt. It's a very, very good attempt. What about some things that could be improved upon? I like struggles were stated, however, they displayed what was gained from the struggles. Exactly. If you're going to talk about a challenge or something that you struggled with, you need to illustrate in your writing that you're able to overcome those challenges. The reason why we want to see that in these personal essays is because the programs you're applying for are going to be challenging. So the people in the committee reading these are going to want to know, are you going to be able to be successful? You know, what are things that could be improved upon?
Yeah.
What I will say about talking about COVID, because if it's done well, it can be really, really helpful for your case in persuading the committee that you deserve to be in the program. But what I will say about this is, remember, there are probably about 400 of these that they're reading. And if everyone is going to talk about COVID, your application is not set aside from everybody else. It gets lost in the crowd. So you can talk about how COVID affected you, but make sure you're doing it in as unique a way as possible. Now, I can't tell you how to do that. That has to deal with your own personal experiences through COVID. But if you just say, COVID was really hard and I had to figure out a way how to navigate that. Think about how many other people are going to be talking about that. It's like when people say, oh, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. Everybody's going to say that. So you want to make sure that, for example, if you're going to talk about how you navigated the pandemic, make sure that it's a unique experience that you can talk about.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I will say, as one of the things that I think they could have done better, and then I think we're going to have to move on here, this is a giant paragraph. Would anyone agree with me? When you look at this page, is anybody like, whoa, this is too much? So one of the things to keep in mind when you're doing this, you still want to have paragraphs. Each of those paragraphs needs to have some kind of purpose to them. I want to give you guys a revision technique that you can use for any kind of writing, and it involves purpose. So if we imagine what is the purpose of the writing that we're looking at, you can go from as abstract to concrete about this as you can. What is the purpose of the paragraph that I'm reading currently? What is the purpose of the sentence within that paragraph? What is the purpose of the word within the sentence? You can go as minute as possible. But really, when we're talking about from an organization standpoint, you know, when we have paragraphs, be sure to consider what is the purpose of each of those paragraphs, because each paragraph and each sentence should have a unique and distinct purpose within the writing for your personal essay. So just another tool for you to use. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my share screen. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. 1 second. And we're going to continue. So, steps to develop a successful writing process. Now, the steps that I'm about to go over, it's not exhaustive, and it's not necessarily in the order that everybody should do. Your writing process is going to be your own unique writing process. Everyone's is different. The things we're going to go over now, everybody usually has some form or shape of them. So like the first one we're going to be talking about is pre-writing. Everybody usually does some kind of pre-writing, whether you're just keeping it in your head, you're writing an outline, you're brainstorming on a whiteboard, you're using index cards and Post-it notes. Usually everyone has a different version of pre-writing that works for themselves. I'm here to encourage you to use as many different tools as possible as you craft your personal essay. You may have a method for your writing that works just for you. And if that works, perfect, use that. I do want to challenge you to try new and different ways of incorporating things into your writing process just to see how it goes. It might help you and it might not. And if it doesn't, you can always go back to the way that you have been doing it if that's how it works. But right now, I'm going to give you some tools for you to use, for you to consider, maybe to incorporate into your existing writing process and go from there. So pre-writing. Pre-writing looks a lot like what I have just been talked about brainstorming, outlining, just thinking of things in your head, jotting down ideas in a journal, using index cards or Post-it notes to write down ideas and physically organize them. If you're a visual learner, one of the things you can use to really tackle the issue of, is my organization, really working for me? Does it flow well? Write your ideas or the points that you're making in your paper on an index card or a Post-it note, right? And what you can do then is, because they're movable and because they're small, lay them out on a table in the order that you're wanting to present your ideas, the order which you're going to talk about them in your paper. Then what you can do, because again, they're small and you can move them, change the order, take pictures on your phone so you can see the differences in these different ways that you want to organize things. And it will get a little messy, but it can be helpful, particularly if you're more tactile in learning or if you're more of a visual and you need everything laid out. Just another tool for you. This is a brainstorming worksheet. We look at personal. What are the talents, the interests, the attributes that make you special? Community, extracurricular activities, volunteer work, civic or church groups that you're involved in, academic, achievements, awards, and recognitions that you have received, and the campus organizations and special programs that you're involved in. Personal, your work experience. And then going forth to see, do we see any traits or characteristics that have a direct connection to what you're wanting to do, to getting into a pharmacy program and to then eventually being a practicing pharmacist? So some things to think about when we're doing this pre-writing stage. No one's pre-writing stage is going to look the same. So some people may use a worksheet that looks like this. Some people may just take out a sheet of paper and start writing. And that's totally fine. Some kind of pre-planning before you really get into the nitty-gritty of drafting a draft is going to be really, really helpful to you in the long run. So I said before, some people in their pre-writing, they just do it all in their head. I don't recommend that. But I know that some people don't like to do, traditional outlining, Roman numeral 1 intro, letter A, point 1, little case a, sub point 1. Some people don't vibe with that. Some people don't like it. So use what works for you. Drafting, it's usually going to be the next step. Once you have your pre-writing done, and I want to stress, this doesn't mean that once you do all your pre-writing, you can't go back to brainstorming. You can't go back to outlining. You can move back and forward through the writing process as needed, whatever you need to do. So if you're drafting your paper and you need to go back to the drawing board to do some brainstorming, that's acceptable. That's totally fine. And especially for something like this, a personal essay for a pharmaceutical program. So once you have your pre-writing done, you're ready to begin writing a draft of your story that reveals your character, grabs your reader's interest, and clearly communicates your message. So some tips. It's going to be your first time, when you're drafting. Your first time is not going to be perfect. You're going to have to write several drafts. I had a friend that was accepted full ride into an international master's program in the UK, she had to write 17 different drafts of her personal statement. So I'm not saying you have to write 17 drafts of your personal essay, but don't be afraid if you have to write 5 drafts, 7 drafts, 10 drafts. If 3 drafts is enough and you're happy with that, that's fine too. But don't be afraid to have to do more than 1 draft. You shouldn't be turning in your first draft anyway. If you get stuck in an area, just come back to it. That's okay. Give yourself time to put the draft aside for a few hours or some days, ideally. When we do the revision process, for example, we tend to do that right after we've been writing, because we all procrastinate. We're all human, we all procrastinate. So when we draft, we tend to do our revisions right afterwards. Our brain has no break. So that means we really have to give ourselves a break, because when our minds are rested, we have a better opportunity to be able to see what are the areas that we can improve upon on our own. When you've finished the draft, check to make sure that you've addressed all of the required items. Make sure that you read, that you reread, that you reread your program's requirements. Somebody had a question about how many words do they typically have? How many characters should they have? How many pages? That's going to be in the program requirements. So make sure that you really pay attention. Are you addressing each of the line items that's being requested of you? Revising and editing, this is usually one of the last steps in your process. And some tips to think about. Give yourself time to reread and revise multiple times. My favorite method for self-revision, and again, it does take time, and I am a procrastinator, I'm human, we all procrastinate, is to set a pre-deadline before the deadline. So for example, let's say that I want to submit my draft next Friday. I'm going to have a completed and finished draft done, say 2 days before that, maybe even 3, if I can have the time to do it. 2 or 3 days before the set deadline, have that done. Print it out and put it physically in a drawer. Walk away, forget about it. Now, I don't know what it is about printing it out, holding it in your hand physically, putting it in a drawer. I didn't invent the magic. This is just how it tends to work. A few days later of it being in that drawer, take it out, physically hold the paper in your hand. Don't have it on your laptop. Don't read on your computer screen. Hold it in your hand and read it out loud. You are going to be amazed at what you find. You're going to be amazed at how many changes you can make. And so just as another tool for you to use, I call it the magic drawer. Just put it in a drawer, forget about it. If you don't have 2 or 3 days, try to just do 1 day. If you don't have 1 day, that's going to be a little trickier, maybe an afternoon, but don't try to do your revision process right as soon as you're done drafting. You need a break. You have to take a break. Proofread again, and then proofread once more. It's often a good idea to let it cool. We just talked about it between proofreading sessions. That way your brain can see the differences. Because if you're making similar mistakes throughout and your brain is a little tired from doing all that drafting and writing, you're not going to be able to catch it. Okay, so just something to keep in mind there. Visit the Writing Center. Writing Center is a free service, and by free, I mean it's included in all your student fees to get some help on your writing. We're there for all students on campus. We work with all different kinds of writing, including personal statements and personal essays. So if you need help, if you feel like getting somebody to look at it would be a great idea, make an appointment with the Writing Center. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Have a friend or a parent read it, then revise and polish, then proofread again. Be sure that the final draft is the best work that you're capable of doing. And that's why I say, you don't have to do 17 drafts. If 10 is appropriate, if 5 is appropriate, that's okay. But don't be afraid to do multiple drafts so that you get the best possible draft that you can come up with to the best of your abilities. Okay, so I'm going to go over this really quickly so that I can answer any final questions. But if you have questions about making an appointment with the Writing Center, it's very easy to contact us, all right? You can send us an email, you can call our offices Monday through Friday, and we'd be happy to help set up an appointment for you so that you could get some extra help.
Well, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this session for today. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate each and every one of you. Best wishes on your application process, and I look forward to seeing your applications when they arrive into our FarmCast. Have a great day, a great weekend, and Enjoy the rest of your summer.